At the age of 13, Maria Montessori wanted to become an engineer, despite the protests of her parents. She enrolled in a technical school, however, she soon switched to medicine, and she later became the first woman in Italy to graduate from a medical school. And not long after this, she became an educator, and she made observations of young children in asylums. And this led her to believe that mental deficiency was at root a pedagogical problem. Following this, she studied pedagogy and particularly the philosophies of Rousseau and Pestalozzi, and soon after this she gave a series of lectures on special methods of education at a teacher training institute in Rome. Following this, she was appointed director of a medical pedagogical institute, and she taught at a pedagogic school at the University of Rome. Then in 1890 she opened the first Casa de Bambini, a school for children who were running wild in Rome's tenements while their parents were at work. In the Montessori Method, first published in 1909, Montessori set forth the theory and practice of the Casa dei Bambini. The book was so widely translated and well received that people across the world came to Rome to observe her ideas in action. Abroad, Montessori made many speaking tours. She visited the United States in 1913, and a news article referred to her ideas as having taken their place in history next to those of Rousseau and Pestalozzi. She continued to lecture to huge audiences and give training courses throughout Europe. However, in 1935, Mussolini closed down all of her schools, and after this she moved to Holland to continue her work and to deliver the addresses that would later be collected in her work Education and Peace. In 1939, she left her home for India during World War II, and she trained over 1,000 teachers while giving the lectures that later formed the basis for her works The Absorbent Mind and The Discovery of the Child. Returning to Europe after the war, Montessori spoke, wrote, traveled to conferences, and gave teacher training courses until her death. At the time of her death, she had been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize 3 times. Responsibility for the decline of Montessori's popularity and reputation in the US lies largely with William Hurd Kilpatrick, who was a member of the faculty of Teachers College in Columbia University and was a disciple of John Dewey. In a speech to the International Kindergarten Association and in a monograph addressed to teachers and school superintendents, Kilpatrick asked where, among other systems of education, Montessori's belonged. He faulted Montessori's work with mentally ill children, and he called her illogical, and he compared her unfavorably to John Dewey. He stated that those who put Montessori among the significant contributors to educational theory are ill-advised, and that she was hardly a contributor to our theory, if at all. Despite these criticisms, Montessori's ideas about the importance of the child's environment, her system of individualized instruction, the exercises for sensory training and practical living she designed, and her emphasis on auto-education have become widespread across the world and have been admired by many educational thinkers. They have had and continue to have a worldwide influence on educational practice. And today, Montessori schools proliferate, and Montessori organizations and training courses thrive in North America, Asia, Europe, and Australia. And in the US, where she was once severely criticized by educators, there are now Montessori public schools and independent schools, preschools and middle schools, and daycare homes. Montessori viewed the child as a spiritual embryo. She told European audiences that the child must no longer be considered as the son of man, but rather as the creator and the father of man. She believed that the spiritual embryo's promise will only be fulfilled if the child is allowed to develop normally. Since a child's psychic life begins at birth, the problem of peace becomes one of educating young children. She believed that just as the physical embryo derives its nutrients from the womb, the spiritual embryo absorbs them from its surroundings. Put children in the wrong environment and their development will be abnormal. They will become deviated adults. However, if you create the right environment for them and their characters will develop normally. The second womb is what she called the young child's proper environment. From the age of 3, the Casa de Bambini was to be that second womb. What then is the character of the institution she called home? Well, Montessori believed that as one dwells in a house, one is supposed to feel safe, secure, loved, and at ease. And this was the kind of home that was envisioned by Montessori. And she was aware that not all homes are safe and loving. She did not just dream of modeling her school on any home. She believed that the Casa de Bambini was not going to simply be a place where the children are just kept, not just an asylum, but a true school for their education. One clear implication of Montessori's concept of school as home is that the inhabitants of school constitute a family. Just as the model for school in Montessori's theory is an idealized version of home, an exemplary family serves as the model for the relationship in which those attending school stand to one another. While instruction in a Casa de Bambini school is definitely individualized, however, like the individual members of the family of Montessori's imagination, even though the children are treated as individuals and their individuality is allowed to flourish, they feel connected to one another and concerned about each other's welfare. Although Montessori's name is usually just associated with the education of young children, in her work From Childhood to Adolescence, she applied her idea of school as home to the case of teenagers. In this work, she proposed that adolescents live together in the country away from their private homes, and that they run a modern farm, a country store, and the Rural Children's Hotel, directed by a married couple who would exercise a moral and protective influence on the youths. This home away from home would be an ongoing commercial enterprise, conserving a tradition by which personal talent was expressed in the fabrication of objects. The store would sell the produce not only of the young people but also of poor neighbors. Mixing business with friendship, it would also serve as a kind of social center. Most interpreters of Montessori's thought have not realized that the Casa de Bambini was meant to compensate for the domestic vacuum in the lives of children whose mothers were required to work each day outside their own homes. Even those who were aware of its origins apparently did not realize that the Casa de Bambini was meant as a surrogate home for children. As a consequence of this, Montessori's idea of school has never fully been appreciated. Montessori's idea of school was to be the moral equivalent of a home. Because fathers have left home each day to go to work ever since the Industrial Revolution, and many families are headed by single mothers, the exodus of women to the workplace greatly expands this concept of school's range of application. One reason why Montessori's domestic imagery has been neglected is that it violates basic cultural expectations about the role of school in society. Members of Western industrial and post-industrial societies implicitly divide social reality into two parts, the private home and the public world, and take the view that the function of school should be to transform children who have to this point lived their lives in one part into members of the other. Assuming that the private home is a natural institution and that accordingly membership in it is a given rather than something that one must achieve, they see no reason to prepare people to carry out the tasks and activities associated with it. Perceiving the public world as a human creation and membership in it as something at which someone can succeed or fail, and therefore as problematic, they make preparation for carrying out the tasks and activities associated with it the main business of education. Montessori wanted the Casa de Bambini to form children for life in the public world, but she knew that a public world hospitable to peace would have to be very different from the one of her acquaintance, and that those living in it would have to have been formed by a very different kind of school. Envisioning school as an extension of the private home and the world as continuous with school and home, she left no room in her system for the radical dichotomy so often drawn between school and home and world and school.
Montessori may not have been the only or even the first person in the history of Western educational thought to reject a radical separation between school and home. Since, however, she is the one who built domestic imagery into her theory, even as her educational practice acknowledged the importance of the atmosphere, affections, and curriculum associated with home and domesticity, the system that Kilpatrick claimed had nothing new in it of importance is nothing short of revolutionary.